Welcome to my channel. Please hit like, share, and subscribe. This is Mary Wells, Motown's First Superstar, Volume 7, Part 3. The deal made sense at the time because Motown executives stopped promoting a song as soon as they thought it had completely exhausted its sales potential, and royalties accordingly dropped off. No one could foresee that an enormous wave of nostalgia for songs by Wells and other Motown stars would develop in future years. This meant that within Wells' lifetime, advertising agencies, big corporations, and Hollywood could and would endlessly and legally recycle many of her Motown songs without paying Wells a dime for the privilege. In contrast, Mary Wilson of the Supremes, who did not sign away her royalties when she left Motown, told one interviewer that years after departing she was earning $80,000 a year in royalties from her hits for that company. But Motown, too, was hurt by Wells' successful battle to leave. As a young, struggling company, it wasn't exactly rolling in money, and it was small time compared to the giant music corporations that could eat it alive. Mary Wells was its major star. If the big boys like 20th Century Fox could watch complacently while Motown nurtured youthful black musicians and then tempt them away with huge bundles of cash, Motown's future looked bleak as anything other than a black feeder to the majors. Gordy took immediate action. Neither his long business relationship with Mary nor the fact that he no longer had to pay her royalties on songs that she had already recorded for him prevented him from putting into deep storage the tapes of her unreleased songs. He then recorded some of those songs with other soloists and groups, the standout example being the Supremes. Although the Supremes hadn't had any top 10 hits yet, Motown seemed to see the group's future success on the horizon. It had used that knowledge to reassure the record industry that even with Wells, Motown's big star, on the way out, the Supremes would pick up the baton. In a press release Motown sent to Billboard and other publications during Mary's attempt, Motown vice president and sales director said he would like to alert the industry to a group of young ladies called the Supremes, who will have the next #1 record in the United States, Where Did Our Love Go, on Motown. Mary and Mae James Holler were driving together when they heard the Supremes on the radio giving their all to that tune, which they believed had been earmarked for Mary. Mae said, "Diane is singing your song." Mary's reaction was, "That's okay, that's Berry's song," which in legal terms it was. But in emotional terms, Mary's a tourist, Mae said later. She's just laid back. Although the Supremes had saved Motown from a devastating post-Mary decline, relationships between Mary and her first employer remained tense for years. In 1983, Motown produced a television special titled Motown 25, Yesterday, Today, and Forever, and invited Mary to appear on it. Although some would say it was amazing that Wells was invited at all, she was of course the entertainer who had given the Motown label its first #1 hit and the one who had held the company together economically while the Supremes were struggling to gain traction. Mary performed for the broadcast, singing one verse of My God, while sporting a bulky blonde wig and wearing a blue gown that was attractive but appeared to be made of a substance resembling bubble wrap. It more or less disguised the fact that she was pregnant with twins. Many of Mary's friends and supporters considered it a gross insult that she was given only 30 seconds of stage time in a segment of the show that was meant to honor individual DJs and TV personalities as much as individual vocalists. If so, the insult was followed by injury when Mary later miscarried the twins. She didn't blame it on the performance, however, noting that both her mother and grandmother had miscarried sets of twins as well. In early 1964, Months before she walked out of Motown, Wells had begun discussing a move to a larger record company, one that would pay her more. In the process, she and Herman Griffin decided they needed a third person on their team. Their gaze settled on another hard-driven in the competitive Detroit recording industry, Robert West. This 6'1" music producer and entrepreneur had big plans, a hard-boiled personality, extensive record industry experience, and a history of competing against Motown. Unfortunately, he also had an out-of-control temper, as well as a handgun he always carried and didn't hesitate to draw and point at others at the least provocation. Despite West's rough edges, Griffin and Wells were impressed that he had sold several hit records to New York companies, including the Falcons' You're So Fine to United Artists and Betty LaVette's My Man, He's a Loving Man to Atlantic. In the late 1950s, West had begun to produce recordings by black artists that would appeal to both white and black listeners. He hired Marv Johnson as the vocalist for one of these attempts, but the song failed to chart. Johnson promptly separated from West and rose to number 9 on the Billboard Pop chart on the United Artists label in 1960 by recording I Love the Way You Love, which was co-written by Gordy. West then released Where's the J Nature Boy, sung by so-so vocalist Brian Holland. Where's the Joy Nature Boy, sung by so-so vocalist Brian Holland, which also failed to succeed as an R&B or pop song. Holland thanked West politely and then signed on at Motown. At that moment, Griffin and Wells were not only plotting to put Wells' career partly in West's hands, but also trying to convince other talented people to escape Motown's grip and join them. They also tried to recruit Mickey Stevenson and Brian Holland to work with them. They both declined. In July 1964, West and Griffin flew from Detroit to New York to negotiate on Wells' behalf with 20th Century Fox Records and other interested parties. Wells, along with her personal manager and best friend, 23-year-old Mae James Harler, was already there. Then, at the height of her popularity, Wells had just finished a week-long engagement at Freedom Land USA in the Bronx. After arriving in New York City, West and Griffin moved into a suite on the 7th floor of Manhattan's Savoy Plaza Hotel. Wells and Mae James Heller were staying in a similar suite on the 5th floor. At about 11 p.m. on July 23rd, Mae was in the suite she was sharing with Wells. Mary had jumped in the shower and gone to bed, Mae said. I was so tired I just wanted to lay down. But first, she had to prepare some papers for the next day. Griffin and West had been out, but had returned to their room a few moments before. Griffin went down to the room occupied by the two women, knocked on the door, and told Mae that he had to tell Mary something. Griffin was still in the women's suite when West knocked on the door and Mae let him in. While the two men talked in the living room, Mae walked through the bedroom she shared with Wells to use the adjoining bathroom. When she came out of the bathroom, she could hear West and Griffin shouting at each other. Mary was in the living room telling them to calm down. When the men didn't pay any attention to her, Mary, disgusted, joined Mae in the bedroom. I could tell this argument was going to another place, Mae said. It was getting crazier and crazier. Then the two men began to tussle with each other. The frightened women stood behind the closed door of their bedroom in silence, listening to them. We didn't know what to do, Mae said. Then we heard a gun go off. Stunned, Mae hurriedly took Wells into the bathroom so that they could be as far as possible from whoever had fired the gun. They closed the bathroom door and huddled together against the bathroom wall. Mae then realized that she had forgotten to lock the bathroom door. At just that moment, the door began to push open slowly, just like a horror movie. The two women, clutching each other in fear, remained pressed against the bathroom wall as the door opened. Herman Griffin was standing there with blood all over him, May said. Griffin stared at them with a stunned look on his face. While Griffin stood there as if paralyzed, May found the courage to walk past him into the bedroom and pick up the telephone. She dialed the hotel operator and said there had been a shooting in the room. When the operator asked May if she was able to leave the room, May and Wells quickly left the room. Robert Bateman, who had arranged for Mary's initial meeting with Gordy and was still in touch with Mary, said the dispute was over whether Mary would sign with Atlantic Records or 20th Century Fox Film Corporation, and she wanted to go into the movies. But West had apparently taken some money from Atlantic, which also was seeking Wells' services. He was drinking and was afraid something was going to happen to him if Mary didn't take the deal he had signed her up for, May said. Betty Levette, who wasn't present but apparently talked to Griffin later, provided more details on what went on while Mary and May were hiding in their bathroom. The dispute between the two men became so heated, Levette said, that West pulled what she called his little ragged gun on Griffin. Herman ran toward West and pushed his hand back. The gun fired, and the bullet went through West's eye and through his brain. The New York Daily News reported that the bullet had plowed into West's head just above his left eye. He was taken to Roosevelt Hospital. Amazingly, he survived. Griffin, accused of assault, was hauled before a Manhattan grand jury on November 17, 1964, where Irving Lang, one of Morgenthau's assistant district attorneys, attempted to convince the jurors to indict him. Lang failed, possibly because Griffin told the jury the same story he had told Levette, and Griffin walked. He was not only free of legal charges, but also remained active in the music business. West said later that all he remembered about the incident was ending up on the floor of the hotel room. After recovering at Roosevelt and finding that he was going to be blind in one eye for the rest of his days, he finally decided that struggling against Motown was a losing proposition. He moved to Las Vegas and worked at various jobs, occasionally sending out material about his former musical activities via a post office box, until his death from natural causes in 1983.